Well, hello. My name is Steve Stegner. I'm a lifelong resident here in Forest Lake, and I have the privilege of having a few guests with me today, and we're going to talk about the history of Forest Lake and really spend some time on the hospital, I'm guessing, here in Forest Lake. You know, for many years, people have been talking about possibly putting a museum together in Forest Lake, and now it's actually coming to fruition. We're going to have a museum downtown Forest Lake from June 4th of this summer to the 16th of July. So this is going to kind of be one of the kickoffs of what we're going to have in the museum, just to spark everyone's interest. So, you know, my history only goes back to the mid-1960s that I can remember, but these folks here, my memories pale in comparison to the history that's sitting right here at this table. Immediately to my left, I have Howard Ruggles, a business owner, a longtime resident of Forest Lake, and his dad was one of the early doctors here in this community. And then Howard and I do share something in common, or many things, but one of them is we both served on the Forest Lake City Council.
Right. You as mayor and I as a councilman.
And then we have Dr. Pikert. Dr. Pikert has served as my family's doctor back in the mid-1960s, so that's a long ways back. And then we have B. Tolzman. B, I have so many memories of those 4th of July parades with that old-time car of yours kind of being the focal point of those parades. So I'm going to start off and just have each one of you introduce yourselves for just a few minutes, kind of tell us a little bit about your background. Then I'll ask some questions, or feel free to talk about anything you like. B, I'm going to start with you. Ladies first. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I tell you, I had the privilege of working at Dr. Ruggles Hospital, and it was a real interesting place to work. And it was opened in 1948, and I started in 1948. I was only 19 years old. I wasn't married yet then. And it was just such a fun place to work because it was like a family. All of us worked together, and there was very few on the staff, but we, of course, only had 15 beds hospital. So, but I can remember so many things.
Well, B, at 19 years old, what did you do there?
I was an LPN.
Okay. And did you have to go to school for that at that time?
Yes. Yes.
And what did that school consist of?
It was a year training. I took 3 months at St. Barnabas, just in OB.
Okay.
And so otherwise it was a year training.
Do you remember what you got paid back in those days?
Yes, I do. I found the record just the other day. I got less than $1 an hour at Dr. Ruggles Hospital.
Sounds like someone was being a little cheap.
But you know, my training only cost $50. So.
Really? Amazing.
So it was just an interesting place to work. And I remember Howard.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Dr. Pikert and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll come back.
Howard and I knew one another at Gustavus. So we got to know one another pretty well. I interned at St. Luke's in Duluth in 1956 and 1957. We drove through here frequently, seeing the old water tower, the old tin soldier, whatever you want to call it. And I thought at that time, I just wonder if it would be to practice with Doc Ruggles. But time went on, and I enlisted in the Air Force for 2 years, practiced for 2 years in Elbow Lake, Minnesota, and then came here to Forest Lake and started practice here November 18th, 1961. The hospital was not yet wasn't yet opened, and we hospitalized our patients in Chisalgo City. Our hospital did open on the 28th of January 1962. Before that, we worked hard to help to get the hospital going. My wife, Jean, set up surgery, set up OB, and helped to set up emergency room, all without pay. It was a grand day when we opened that hospital. We were there for the birth of the hospital and the death of DMH.
Howard, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a lifelong resident of Forest Lake, born and raised here, needless to say. And my father came to Forest Lake much on the same circumstances you did, Carl. He traveled, you know, up to Taylor's Falls and back down to White Bear, and he thought that Forest Lake was an area that would be a perfect site. And He started his practice in January of 1932, and he was drafted, so to speak, into the Army in 1942. And that was only 10 years of service here in Forest Lake, but he did an awful lot in those 10 years. When he came back from the Pacific conflict, he started his practice up again and really ran into a lot of problems with getting his patients into the Twin City hospitals because he wasn't on the staff.
Okay.
And so consequently, that kind of planted the seed for opening a hospital here in Forest Lake. There was a real need for a hospital, and needless to say, Dad wasn't able to provide for that total need. And the communities in the area realized that and were very good about it, and bought my father out at a reasonable price, I assume, I don't know. And hence the District Memorial Hospital came into being because of the local areas.
So about how many communities kind of pitched in for District Memorial Hospital?
I think it was around 5, but I won't swear to it.
But so it was probably like a 15-mile radius around Forest Lake, or how did that work?
I would guess that because we had Hugo, Columbus, Wyoming, Linwood, yeah. And then Forest Lake, of
Hugo
course.
was in that area too.
Yes.
So where was the first hospital that your dad put together rather than District Memorial?
I'm living in it.
Well, that's what I hear. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well,
B has a picture of it, just so you know.
when my wife and I came to Forest Lake and went into business, we were always bouncing around from place to place as far as something that we could afford to live in. And my father, when they closed up the hospital, had kept it on a keep fill for oil, for heat, because there was hot water heat in the building.
Okay.
And needless to say, someone made a mistake someplace along the line, and they ran out of oil, and the water lines froze in that building, and you cannot believe the mess. Well, we had it appraised 3 different times, and all the appraisals came out for nothing more than the value of the land. The house was a total loss. Well, and my father is a tough negotiator, but that's what we got it for. And my wife, being a bull-headed German, wasn't going to tear the old building down. We proceeded to start remodeling and a little bit every year, and it's been a real task, but a real joy of love. And I remember the hospital so dearly, as Bee will attest. It was a family, and I used to. My main job was mowing the grass, seeing to it the stoker was filled. That was early days. It was on coal. That's the way it started out, and I had to take the clinkers out and keep the stoker full. And I don't know how many times at 4 o'clock in the morning I'd get called up and, your fire is out in here.
Howard, what are clinkers? Because I'm not familiar with that term.
Oh, clinkers are, in the fire pot, this coal goes in there and it burns really hot, but they don't melt or turn to ash. They turn to like a stone, and it's called a clinker. And you have to break up the clinkers so you can get them out. And you had a big long tong that you'd reach in and but that was my job, and eating pies.
Well, that sounds like a good job.
I remember that.
B only got $1 an hour, but I can't imagine how much I got in pies. I got a lot.
Well, tell the folks why you got pies.
Well, of course, the kitchen was in the basement, and I had access to the basement and the nurses' station down there and rest area. And what was her name? Mrs. Anderson? What was her name?
No, Marie Peterson.
Mrs. Peterson was the cook at the hospital. And oh my gosh, she made the best pies. outside of my mother that I know.
Lemon pie especially.
Yeah. And she'd always have an apple pie or a rhubarb pie or a peach pie or something around. And they had to be sampled.
Well, of course. Well,
No, you wouldn't want any
Yeah,
of the custard
that
or
was
any of
your
the
job.
patients. Yeah.
and this was generally for the patients at the hospital or for staff or both?
It was for both.
Okay.
The patients, and I think the patients were fed pretty doggone well.
They were wonderful.
Yeah.
She made her own bread and everything.
Yeah. Rumor is hospital food isn't that good anymore.
Well, I know, but it's it's pretty good for what you can do with it, you know.
Sure.
But no, we just and then of course my years at the hospital progressed to ambulance driving, but I just detested that. I couldn't stand the sight of the blood and the and
Did you take training for being an ambulance driver?
No.
Okay.
No, it wasn't required at all. You just had to have a heavy foot.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
B, what are some of your memories of that first hospital in the Dr. Ruggles?
Well, I just remember Dr. Ruggles. I thought it was wonderful that he started a hospital at that time because there were so many baby boomers born at that time. And people could go to the hospital and wouldn't have to travel so far to go to the hospital. And I remember the first year there was like 365 babies born that first year.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it was only a 15-bed hospital and 6 little bassinets for the babies. And I remember one night, February 18th, 1949, and there was 5 babies born within just a few hours. So
That's something.
it was a busy, busy place.
How long do they typically keep moms in the hospital after they had their babies?
It was usually about a week.
Okay.
Yeah,
Things have sure changed.
things have changed. And didn't get out of bed until at least the 3rd day.
Do you think the babies are getting bigger nowadays? Because it seems like people are commonly having much larger babies. Do you remember how big they were at that time?
It seems like they were all pretty good size.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Good.
had a preemie once in a while, but very seldom. It seemed like we had preemies.
Dr. Piker, what are some of your early memories of the hospital, being that you came in 1961?
In 1962, Dr. Ruggles, Midbow, and Purdy and I shared the emergency room call. And oftentimes when I was on call on the weekend, I would stay at the hospital and do my records and that sort of thing. And there was one time when the head nurse had me see some patients not in sequence like Dr. Ruggles had thought it should be. So he said, "That young whippersnapper is taking my patients." So I was a young whippersnapper.
Well, that's good to be known as the young whippersnapper, I'm sure.
I think he was pretty glad.
Yeah. You know, Carl always has said when my father was alive that he really should have written down some of his memoirs because he had some unbelievable things happen to
so
him.
many things happened.
I mean, he had run-ins with Ma Barker and her gang. And
Wow.
I remember they came to our garage one day on a Sunday afternoon and forced him down to the office to take a bullet out of somebody's shoulder.
George
And,
said, "He dies, you die."
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Wow, yeah.
That's excitement here in Forest Lake.
Well, yeah, at that time it wasn't unbelievable, but yet it was unbelievable, you know, and that was just the times, I guess, you know.
Now, I did hear a rumor about him carrying pregnant patients up to deliver babies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I never saw him carrying a lady up to the 2nd floor. All I know is that the maternity ward was on the 2nd floor, and not every one of those ladies could make it up there on their own.
Sure.
I'm sure. But whether he carried them or if he helped them, or I remember we had a funny-looking stretcher. It was a real heavy curved thing, you know, and because of our stairwell at the hospital, it was a short turn, and you had to almost stand that patient up.
Yeah, I almost had to bed that gurney.
Right, that's right. And
Wow.
and So it was quite difficult to do in some instances, particularly if the lady was really in distress, and some often are. And but I lost my line of thought. What was the question?
Well, we were just reminiscing about the hospital and about your dad possibly carrying a pregnant woman up to the maternity ward.
It's possible, but like I say, I never actually saw it happen.
George told me he did.
Then if he said it, he did.
That's absolutely right.
I do know, and you guys will probably attest to it too, that my dad always carried a set of snowshoes in the trunk of his car. And doctors at that time, that was a big part of their practice, was going to the homes. And he also had a portable delivery table that he carried with him. And all of that stuff we gave to the Historical Society after my father passed away, and I don't have any idea where it is now, if it's down in Stillwater or where, but he delivered a lot of babies. He was a baby doctor primarily, and he loved that, yeah.
And B, what did people primarily come to the hospital for back, you were saying in the late 1940s that you were involved in it?
Well, I tell you, I remember so many car accidents. At the time the hospital first opened, especially, because there was no stoplights on 61 and by the trestle. And there was so many bad accidents there.
And probably no seat belts, no
No
airbags,
seat belts,
obviously.
Right. Oh, they were just awful.
Probably no speed limits.
And
3-lane road.
I remember 2 families that were in a car accident there, and they were both brought into the hospital, both cars, 2 from each car. And we had to put one on first floor and one on the second floor because there was an argument about whose fault it was.
Oh,
So we had to be very careful.
Sure.
But they were from out of state, and they came back later and complimented all of us for the good care they got and how Dr. Ruggles had sutured them so well that they didn't have to have plastic surgery. There was so many facial injuries. So I remember he was praised for that.
Well, what are some maybe the more unusual things that you remember in those early days from the hospital?
Well, like Howard, I remember the food so well. It was so good. And we always just enjoyed going downstairs and around that round table and having a real discussion sometimes. And it was always fun. And we just had so many patients, and a lot of the patients I knew because I went to school in Forest Lake, and a lot of the patients that came in were friends of mine. So I was able to sit with some of them and when they had their babies, and it was just a fun place to be.
Now, Dr. Piker, you said you kind of identified Forest Lake as being a place you might want to be as you were going back and forth. Did you think of it as a place to raise your family, or did you think of it as a place to, wow, there looks like there's a lot of sick people here?
I thought of practice.
Okay.
Our emergency room was terribly busy. Prior to the freeway, 2 main highways in Minnesota coming together through one city, 8 and 61, it was terrible. You could count on accidents practically every time you were on call. On holidays, the traffic would be strung out probably a mile either direction, trying to get through on 8 and 61 to Minneapolis and St. Paul. We did a lot of surgery here too. We did hernias, appendectomies, cesarean sections, herniorrhaphies, hemorrhoidectomies, everything we did here. We had consultants come out on the surgery that we didn't do. So it was a very active place.
When District Memorial opened, you said, I think you said like 1962?
Yes.
How many doctors were on staff then?
4. Dr. Ruggles, Midbow, Purdy, and myself.
Okay. And then how long before that ended up growing substantially?
We had, I think Dr. Knott came in 1970, Dr. Narathan and Setness in 72. Then more and more, I can't remember the years they came, but for a long time there were just the four of us. And then Dr. Purdy left in 1965 to go into radiology and made it more busy for us.
So really the 3 and 4 of you pretty much ran the show for,
Yes, we did.
for a great number of years. And so through your practice, I'm sure at that time you knew almost everyone in town.
Very many.
Okay, how neat.
And how many babies did you deliver?
2,775 in my lifetime. Not here, but in my lifetime.
That is
Isn't
an
that
amazing
amazing?
number. B, what is your earliest memory of Forest Lake? If we're not necessarily talking about the hospital.
I was born and raised, well, I was born in the hospital, in Bethesda Hospital. Dr. Poyer delivered me in 1928, that was. So I've been around Forest Lake ever since then.
Probably third grade Sunday school program.
And Sunday school program, yeah.
So what are some of those early memories? Do you remember the train depot being here? Do you remember?
Oh, I remember the depot, yes, very well. And I remember I could stand on the tracks downtown Forest Lake and look west on Broadway and see my dad's farm right at the end of the road, the big silo. and I was just a mile from downtown Forest Lake. That's where I grew up, where Menard's store is now.
Okay. And how many kids in your family then?
I'm the only one,
That's kind of unusual to have a farm and only one child.
right?
Very interesting.
I did the work for all the rest of them.
I'm sure you did. Dr. Piker, you said you came a little bit later in life. What do you remember about the days that you came, or maybe you were here before visiting and coming through Forest Lake?
No, it was during internship that we drove through. Any time that I wasn't on call on a weekend, we would drive down to Minneapolis or my hometown, Cokato, Minnesota.
And what kind of memories do you have of Forest Lake at that time?
It always looked very busy. Wagner's restaurant.
Oh,
I remember Wagner's very well.
do, yeah.
Of course, yes, I do.
everybody. Oh, that was wonderful.
Yep, it was quite a bustling downtown at the time
was,
before the freeway came in.
Yeah, right.
Howard, what are some of your early memories that might have been something other than the hospital?
Well, I spent, of course, I had a paper route, and I delivered papers all over the town, but my primary stops on collection day were Peterson Drug Store for a chocolate malt, or chocolate sundae. Then I would stop over at Wagner's for a chocolate malt. Then I'd end up down at Judd's I had to have a little protein in my life, so I had a hamburger, you know.
Well, what was Judd's? I don't recall that one.
Well, Judd's is,
Before your time.
yeah, that's, what's there now? It's a gas station. What's it called?
I can't remember.
It's right
It
kitty
was-
corner from us, just before you get to the greenhouse. That not a
Okay.
Moto Mart, but
Is it where the vet clinic is now, or the excuse
no,
me?
right across
Across
from
the
there.
Oh, okay.
But that was Judd's, and yeah, that was really a
was
swinging
an
place.
active-
But Wagner's was such a popular place, and of course for nightlife here in Forest Lake, when you were younger, you had to go to the Melody Ballroom.
And where was that?
Well, Melody, well, Don Worth's furniture was in the
Okay.
Melody, and they were asked to close that up.
So we're kind of where Vanelli's is now.
Yes,
Okay, the back half.
right.
And were you part of the reason it had to close, Howard?
No.
I'm trying to spread rumors, just so you know.
There was a lot of beer tied to the ends of the dock, so I'll tell you that to keep it cool.
And the hospital got some business from there too.
Oh gosh. But no, Forest Lake was a nice town. It really was, and I don't think the young people here in Forest Lake were any different than young people anyplace else, except downtown Forest Lake or down on Main Street. Halloween came along, and we had outhouses to turn over in Forest Lake. Can you imagine that?
I do not want to imagine that. No.
Well, we did, and it happened. But no, so they were young people just like any place else, and no, it's a good community.
Well, B, we know what Howard did for fun with the outhouses when he was a kid. What did you guys do for fun?
Well, we had the roller skating rink down by the lake.
Yep, Skateland. Was it still Skateland at the
Well,
time?
it wasn't there. It was a
Oh,
It was a screened-in pavilion, and it was right on the shore,
Yeah.
you know, right next to the lake. And it was a very popular place for everybody. Everybody skated.
I have seen pictures of the pavilion. It was quite a big space.
And it was so nice in the summertime that you could see the moon across the lake, you know, and the moonlight skate.
Oh my.
It was really very nice. And then, of course, after skating, we'd go to Wagner's.
Go to Wagner's.
Yeah.
Now,
And then-
my memory of Wagner's is that it was quite small. It just had the counter on one side
Right.
and one row of booths, so it didn't probably hold much more than I don't want to even say, but somewhere around 30. Did you guys fill up the place?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember how many booths there were.
Yeah, I think it would hold more than 30.
Okay.
About 8
but not a
booths,
whole
maybe?
lot more. Yeah, about
Eight booths, and each one 4.
Yeah.
Okay, and then in front of the grills, there was a counter, wasn't there?
There was a row
you could
counter
sit.
It was stools.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
And then a few slot machines before you get in.
oh,
Now
yeah.
that I didn't know.
Well, they weren't slot machines, but were they? They
Well,
they
they were
had
something like that.
Well,
I
they
don't
had the ball game,
Like pinball machines or
Yeah,
something of that
pinball
Yeah,
nature?
I suppose
Okay.
that's what it
and
was.
and
I never played them.
You got free games on it. So they didn't give you money back, but they gave you free games. But they were always very busy.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very busy. I remember after bowling at night, we would we'd always go down to Wagner's for chili. Or they made the best soup in the world too, but they always had good food.
Oh, yeah,
Always had good food.
I can still see them frying those hamburgers. So, oh, it smelled so good.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Pikert, since you weren't born and raised here, you came here later in life. Did you find this a nice place to raise a family?
Yes, it was. When we first came here, it was kind of a summer city. There were an awful lot of almost shacks around the whole lake where the family stayed during the summer when school was out and Dad worked and came out weekends. And they had outhouses and that sort of thing. And slowly but surely they put a sewer around the lake to help protect the lake. And now there are multi-million-dollar homes around the lake where there were a couple $1,000 shacks.
Sure.
The lake has changed somewhat. There was an eye doctor in town here who stated in the paper that the people's eyes are hurting because people are urinating in the lake and it hurts your eyes. And it's highly doubtful that was the case, but that's what he said.
And that must have been back in the late 60s, something of that nature?
Early 60s.
Early 60s?
Remember Van Wert?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I never heard that, though, before.
Yes, it was in the paper.
Oh, for heaven's
They could
sakes.
probably look it
Oh,
up.
my heaven's sakes.
So, Dr. Pikert, what did your kids do when they were in high school for after-school jobs?
Not much.
Okay, fair enough. B, what did the high schoolers do for jobs when you were a teenager?
Well, I got a job right after I graduated from high school at Hool's grocery store in Forest Lake.
Was that when it was downtown, kind of where by the old crosswalk? Was that about where Hool's was?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was right next to
Peterson's drugstore.
Peterson's drugstore in that area. It's
And-
still there. I mean, the building is still there.
And were you a cashier? Did you do stocking of groceries, deliveries? What did you do?
Well, when you worked at a grocery store in those days, you didn't have you had an old register that you used, but otherwise you did the stocking, you did the sales, and then you'd have to go down and write everybody that was there. You'd have to write their purchase on a slip, you know. So
Okay, so they were billed essentially, or
yeah.
Okay.
Well, some of them were billed, and otherwise you'd have to write. Even if they paid cash, you'd have to write down each item that they got.
kind of for inventory, maybe? Is that why you were writing it down?
I think that's what it was for.
I have a very small memory of Hool grocery store. Them and Ben Franklin had about the best candy in town, as I recall, as I was growing up. My folks had a business on Lake Street as well, and they drug me to work pretty much, many days with them. So I was ventured out and got candy periodically. So.
And then they delivered too, so that was really nice. For people around the lake that, didn't get into the town very often, they'd deliver the groceries to them. I didn't realize they had such a big business until I started working there. They'd have to fill up these boxes, and they'd go from the front door clear to the back door.
Wow.
And they'd have this delivery truck full of groceries.
For heaven's sake, I didn't know that.
And they were the only grocery store in town at that time, or were there others?
No, there was other grocery. There was a Fairway store and a Red Owl store.
Red Owl.
Well, I remember Red Owl when it was across the street from Whole
Right,
Grocery.
Yeah.
Howard, what did your friends do for high school jobs?
Well, my kids were pretty lucky because I was in the retail business, and consequently, when my oldest son was old enough to count minnows, he started filling minnow buckets for me. And then when I moved one door south and bought the hardware store, they all were employed by me. And so I was very fortunate, and we were able to take care of their college educations and whatnot that way. But they always managed to have free time too. I don't know,
Oh, of course.
yeah, I don't know just exactly what all.
So you had what bait store was it? Was it Johnson's?
That's
Bob
what
Johnson
brought me
Sporting
here to
Goods.
Forest Lake. I had bought the Bob Johnson Sporting Goods store from Bob Johnson, very dear friend, and will always be. And then when the opportunity came, Les Mathieson, who had the hardware store, we built the building for him. But after 1 year, he realized it was too big, and his children were, I don't know what they were, but there was some conflicts there. And he said, "Howie, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to sell," not knowing that I was interested. But
And that was the Hardware Hank store.
that was the Hardware Hank store. It used to be Anquist Hardware downtown.
Okay.
And well, I was tickled to death, of course, to hear that he wanted to sell. But I didn't have total faith in myself, so I got my brother to come in with me. And so my brother and I started the Hardware Hank store, and not started it, but continued the Hardware Hank store. And then about 4 or 5 years afterwards, I ended up buying him out and had it all.
Well, that was one of my memories too, is going down to Hardware Hank, where you were in that location, and charging it to Emily's Pamper Parlor. They had a charge account there, and I felt pretty important when I
Yeah.
could walk in and charge things. So,
Well, I'm small town, I guess, but you had to have charge accounts in a community like this. You couldn't. My brother and I couldn't see eye to eye on that, and he liked cash business, but he had a banking background too. So I don't. But I realized that we needed to charge, but when I sold the business and went out of business, I only had one account left on my books, and they were all taken care of.
wow, that's
Just-
amazing.
yeah, it really was. People were so good and very conscientious about their accounts, and no problem whatsoever.
Well, like I mentioned before, I was born and raised here. B, you said you were born and raised here. Howard, you as well. I'm going to ask you a question. As I'm getting a little older, I don't know if I'm as tolerant of winters, and I'm wondering why you stayed here in Forest Lake, B.
Well, I got married, and my husband wanted to stay here, so that's where I stayed.
Okay, fair. That's fair enough. Dr. Pikert, you've stayed here for so many years.
I love winter.
Okay.
I love to blow snow. I love to shovel snow. I don't go south to Florida for 6 months. I enjoy it here.
Good. Howard.
Well, I guess I'm a wuss because I do. I leave now, and in November, my wife and I and go west, go out to California and on the desert, and we enjoy our winters out there very much. And hopefully we never come back until the last snow is gone, but we messed up this year.
Ah, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was out of my mind. But we always keep the roads plowed and in the driveway and whatnot, and the shovel the sidewalks. But so those jobs are being done, but not by me.
Well, I can tell you, like Dr. Piker, I really enjoy blowing snow most of the time. It's when I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning because my wife has to be out of the driveway by 7:30, and the wind is blowing. I'm wondering why don't I pay someone like Howard to do this sort of thing?
Why?
But and I do enjoy being out in my yard and mowing. So I think that those are some huge benefits of being here in the summertime. But B, as we're wrapping up, what kind of other memories would you like to share with the folks at home before we wrap this up?
Well, I guess I'm just glad that I worked where I did, when I did. I didn't have to drive very far to work. I saved a lot of gas that way.
Yes,
of course,
you
that
did.
was when gas was cheap too. But I just enjoyed the work I did, and unfortunately, I didn't work as long as I would have liked to. But I got a chance to do other things when I quit working. I think it was 1978 I quit working, and I got interested in the garden club
Okay.
and in different areas of the horticulture society.
Well, what kind of car did you start driving? You said you had saved on gas. So what car did you learn to drive on?
Oh, the one I learned to drive on, that was my dad's car. That was an old Ford. But then, yeah, it was a 49 Ford, I think, is what I...
Well, how were the roads then? Obviously most of them weren't paved. So
Well, when I was young, Broadway was not paved. It was a gravel road. And so sometimes in the spring, it would be pretty hard getting
Sure.
from our place just a mile getting into Forest Lake. The ruts would be pretty deep. But it wasn't long after that, and then they put the freeway in, and then things changed in a hurry.
yes, they did change in a hurry.
B will probably remember this, but I think we had more mud days than we had snow days.
Yeah,
Seriously,
Really?
the roads were so bad, and the school buses couldn't get around.
and we would say, "Oh, come on, get stuck so we
Yeah.
don't have to go to school."
But really, I think there was more mud days than there were snow days.
That is just crazy. Dr. Piker, what are some of the memories you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
We've been fortunate to make the right decisions through life, Jean and I. Having gone in the service, served in France, came back here, practiced 2 years in a rural practice where I was able to drive a grain truck on my half day off and participate in a small town, then move here to a almost suburban type situation, sub-suburban. Was fortunate enough to have been named the Minnesota Family Practice Doc of the Year in 1987. I've had a wonderful life.
That is a wonderful life and a wonderful honor. Congratulations on that. And I know you can't mention any names because of confidentiality, but have you delivered anyone famous as a baby?
Not really.
Okay.
They're all famous to me.
That a boy.
Howard, tell us about some of your memories that maybe we didn't cover here.
Well, sitting here makes me reminisce, and back to the pies down in the basement of the old hospital. I enjoyed that, but I also enjoyed all the young nurses out on the sailboat
Oh,
on the Sundays.
Not me.
Not you know. No. And
sounds like you should write a book.
I don't know. And but no, it's been a good round. It really has, and I can't think of any other way that I would have rather spent it than here in Forest Lake and the people that we've been connected with.
And I agree with all of you here about how wonderful Forest Lake is. I tell my kids every day that it's wonderful to live in America, a country where you can make the decision every single day to move to another part of the United States or another part of the world. And truly, I believe Forest Lake is the best place in the world to live, or I would live somewhere else. I mean, it's just that easy. And Howard, I think you found a few months out of the year where you might have found a place that's a little more to your liking. But certainly, we all make those decisions every day. But I do believe that Forest Lake is a wonderful place. And with our history museum that we're putting together, everybody can come in and kind of look at the different eras that we had through our community.
That's my old hardware store.
It is definitely your old hardware store. You had built it, and it's because of you we're able to have a museum there.
Not because of me.
And
Well,
I remember hearing about my grandparents coming to Forest Lake in 1876,
Wow.
and they settled where District Memorial Hospital was built. That was their first.
Do you remember what the attraction was for your grandparents to move here?
Well, some of the family had come before,
Okay.
and so they settled in Forest Lake, and so then the rest of them settled. My maiden name was Enquist, so there was several Enquists that came at that time.
Well, if they had the home out there by District Memorial, that was the old Beard Farm out that way. The house that was the hospital, or turned into the hospital, was originally the home for
That was Melvin Swanson's place. But maybe, I don't know who was there. It was B.B. Nelson that lived there before that.
in the Beard House.
I never heard it was
No,
a beard
I
house.
remember delivering papers to the Beards. But
Your
I know
father bought the,
he bought the building from the
Beard
Beards.
House.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then put the additions onto it. But at that time, all of that land, which was considered the Beard property, went all the way up to District Memorial Hospital.
oh, well, this was District Memorial back, south,
Okay.
like where Beltz's Park is.
Oh, sure.
Clear
Okay.
to 61.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Pikert, in your mind, what would you say one of the biggest changes is in the city of Forest Lake? If you could possibly put your finger, maybe besides the freeway, what one thing in Forest Lake has really made the most difference?
I think the conversion from a summer city to a year-round city with the fantastic homes around the lake. There were some pretty bad homes around there that people stayed in. They didn't stay there in the winter, and now they have the beautiful homes around it. Beautiful place.
Sure. Howard, going back to when you maybe served on the council or maybe before, what do you think some of the conscious decisions that we made here made Forest Lake the way it is today?
Well, that's a many-faceted question, I guess. I don't know. My idea and hopes for Forest Lake was that it would perhaps be a little bit more progressive than it actually is. And it seems like we can get so mired down into conversations and rhetoric and don't get anything done. It's frustrating sometimes, but and I guess I would like to see the city work a little bit better hand in hand. But I realize there's a lot of facets involved there. I mean, it costs money. You got to bring all these things together, and that brings government into play, and government doesn't seem to have much money anymore.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
B, what are some of the bigger changes that you saw?
Well, I guess the freeway was the biggest change, seemed like. My dad always used to say, they'll never put a freeway through here. And he said there's 2 lakes that they have to go through, and they'll never do that. Well, after he passed away, then here they started.
Did he think the freeway would be a positive change or a negative change for Forest Lake?
Well, he just didn't think it would ever
Okay.
come. But then when it did come, it sure made a change in Forest Lake.
Well, we do have the Forest Lake Museum that's opening on June 4th and going through July 16th. The museum is going to be filled with pictures and videos of Forest Lake's history, along with areas about the history of the hospital, history of the different service organizations in our community, the history of our fire department, police department, and city government. and much, much more. So I invite each and every one of you to swing by the old Hardware Hanks building and visit us at the Forest Lake Museum. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it, and we'll see you at the museum.